So now that we've identified, okay, we know which states to play in and which states we don't want to play in, now it's about how do we choose the area and what do we look for in our due diligence? Because one thing I can tell you straight up is that you can never eliminate the risks when you're investing, right? You can never have a guaranteed investment. All you can do is stack the probability of success in your favour. And the way we do that is just by making sure we've done our research, our homework, proper due diligence, and studied the fundamentals. And the biggest fundamental for us, the first and most important one, is population growth. The reason for that is when you've got more people moving into an area than people moving out, it's going to cause more demand than there is supply. And basic economics teaches us that when you've got more demand than supply, it means price has to go up at some point. That's why Sydney and Melbourne have increased the way they have, is because there was obviously a high level of demand and a certain level of supply. So the way we do that is obviously studying things like, Australian Bureau of Statistics and work out, what projects are happening from a state, or federal or local level that's going to attract people to move into certain areas. And that ties into my next point, being jobs. Because the reason why people move from one place to the next, the majority of the time is because of work. So if someone has to work in an area which is, let's say they've got a job or a contract for the next 2 to 3 years and it's an hour and a half or 2 hours away, and they already own a home, the chances are they're probably going to want to go rent in that area as opposed to go and try and buy another house. Obviously everyone's different, but generally the biggest reason why people move from state to state or from area to area is because of work. So when we do our research and our due diligence on areas that have got projects on site, we look at what's the federal government doing about upgrading certain types of infrastructure. What's the state government doing about things like schools and hospitals? What sort of projects are on site? What new shopping centres are getting built? What new schools are getting built? Because all of these things obviously create jobs, and jobs is what attracts people to move from area to area. The third thing that we look at is the demographic of the area. And the demographic of the area, there's two parts to this. The first part is studying the ratio between people who own their homes and people who are renting. And what we tend to look for is an area that's heavily owner-occupier driven. So we look for areas that is made up of more people that own their homes as a people that are renting. And the reason why that's important is because if you're in an area that has a lot of rentals on the market, and you as an investor buy a house and you put it on the market to rent it out, chances are you have to compete with a lot more other rentals before you get a tenant in yours. And that's what affects vacancy rates. So if you're in an area that's got a high vacancy rate, it means that there's a longer downtime on your property before you get a tenant in there. Whereas when you're in an area which is tightly held by owner-occupiers, meaning people that own their homes, generally speaking, there is lesser rental properties on the market, which means as soon as your house goes on the market, chances are you're going to rent it out a little bit quicker, particularly if you know which market you want to target. So as an example, we like to go after young families. Reason being is we know if we've got a family aged between 35 and 45, they're on a combined income of about $130,000. They've got 2.1 kids on average, and they've got kids that go to a particular school in the area. Dad works either in and around the area, or he's got public transport that takes him to the nearest city. We know that if there's shops and schools and amenities that mum likes, generally speaking, the stickability of that tenant is a lot longer than someone who's a student, someone who's a young professional, someone who's renting an apartment that, where there's a high turnover of tenants. So for us, when we look at the demographic, there's two parts to it. We look at the demographics of the area as a whole, and then we look at the demographic that we want to target and make sure that that demographic is going to, want to rent in the area that we're investing in. Does that make sense? Yeah. So demographics is a really important one. And last, we look at the amenities. And unfortunately, I've come across so many investors in my time that all they look at is just the amenities. I've met investors that tell me, as long as the house is, within walking distance to a school, shops and transport, and there's a hospital nearby, I'm happy. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work that way, because there's more to it than just amenities. Amenities only makes up 25% of our due diligence. The others, we focus more on population growth and jobs as opposed to this stuff, because we know that if you've got enough of this will just come by default. So don't base your investment decisions just based on how many shops and schools and infrastructure that's there, because this will will ultimately influence this side there. So that's how we choose the areas. Obviously, when we do our due diligence for our clients, we invest heavily into a lot of research platforms that allow us to work out, what the population or forecasted population growth is going to look like. So, as an example, we've got an area at the moment between Brisbane and the Gold Coast where the population is forecasted to triple over the next 15 to 20 years. So currently there's 13,000 people living in that suburb. It's expected to hit over 37,000 people. So what that means is that they need 9,300 homes just to accommodate for that growth. Now if they don't build 9,300 homes, guess what's going to happen? Price has to go up. And that's what we look for as the first sign. Second thing we look at is just make sure that there's enough jobs, and we know that this area has $394 million worth of projects on site right now, and it has an increase of 72,000 workers that's going to come out of those projects. So again, that's another good sign for us. We know that the area is very family driven because 82% of the area owns their home, and there's only 18% that are actually investing. So when our property manager sent us a report, there's only 2 4-bedroom homes in the whole suburb that's up for rent at the moment. So guess what happens to rent when there's limited supply? It goes up as well. And as far as the amenities, they're building a new shopping centre at the moment. They've, upgrading all the infrastructure, all the roads, all the train lines, the whole lot. So all of that stuff is getting upgraded because of this up there. Right? Happy to go through more of this, on a one-on-one level, but that's generally how we like to choose our areas.